If you live in America, believe it or not, the 4th of July is for you. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Pastor Tito Sotolongo, and I'm here to help you find faith in Christ and how to follow through in your life. And today's video is a response to a conversation that Pastors Carl Lentz and T.D. Jakes had in the wake of the George Floyd and everything that was happening here in America. This video is a response to something that was said that was really about 2 minutes long, and it kind of went on into something else. And I want to speak to that. So what I want to do is I'm going to play you his words, Pastor T.D. Jakes' own words, and then reply to them.
Our kids need to see that we are human enough, even though the Constitution that was written says that I was not fully human. I swallow that.
Can you just
That's over. Those folks are dead.
Can you mention that about the Constitution real quick, what you just said?
Yes, the Constitution says that we were not fully human. I think it was 1/4 or 2/3 human. That's how they were able to feel comfortable with enslaving me, because they didn't feel, they wrote into the Constitution of this country that I was not human. Now, look, the Constitution that protected you enslaved me.
First off, throughout the whole video, I mean, you can really sense, not just in Pastor T.D. Jakes, but in Carl Lentz, you can sense just the weight of the conversation. So no matter what is said, I want you to know, and I want you to be able to listen to what is being said, to listen to his heart, listen to his pain throughout it all. But in response to the first thing, you can see even the pain when he said and he believed that here in America, the Constitution was written in a way to enshrine that he was not fully a person. Now, what he was speaking about was the 3/5 compromise, which was Article 1, I believe Section 2 of the Constitution. Now, the 3/5 was, yes, it was something that said, hey, all Black people, or really anyone who was a slave, is worth 3/5 of a person regarding representation in Congress. Unfortunately, through history and the way we kind of read things back, it kind of looks like saying, no, hey, they are 3/5 of a person. This had nothing to do with the value of human dignity. It had everything to do with representation. The thing with the 3/5 compromise is that it had good and bad consequences. When you look at their stories, the initial reason for it was actually positive. The reason why the 3/5 compromise was struck was because the country was not holding together. You know, they had just won the Revolutionary War. It had been a couple of years now. The Articles of Confederation were not working. The country was falling apart. And so the founders came back together. They got the team back to say, okay, we need a new form of government because this is not going to last. This experiment is not going to work. And they were afraid of England coming back and just enslaving them all over again. And so there was a battle between the majority of the founders who were anti-slavery with those in the South who were pro-slavery. The founders were trying to pick and choose their battles. Now, the South wanted to count every single slave as a full person for representation in Congress. The North wasn't going to have that because, first off, how are you going to count someone for representation in Congress, yet you're not going to let them exercise any freedoms and liberties? So it didn't make sense. And also because there were so many slaves in the South compared to the North, I mean, there were really none, but compared to the North, I mean, it was favored in the South. It was going to give the South so much power in Congress that the Northern anti-slavery delegation and states were never going to be able to truly abolish slavery the way they wanted to. So they struck the compromise saying, okay, they count as 3/5 in representation. This limited the power of the South, even though it gave them a little bit of power, but it limited that power. In essence, the Northern and the anti-slavery founders were trying to pick and choose their battles. Hey, let's just win this battle right now. Let's get together. Let's keep it all together, because if not, we're all going to end up slaves. And then let's, kind of kick the can down, and we'll deal with this in the future. But the notion that the founders saw Blacks as not fully human was actually very false. John Hancock, who's that big symbol, he's the one with the biggest signature, used to hold equality balls for Black people and Native Americans. Many of the founders established schools that taught slaves and former slaves and Native Americans, they taught them school reading and writing because they knew the value of education regarding liberty and freedom. And so, yes, there were founders who felt that way and did not see Black people and Native Americans as fully human, but it was not the majority. In fact, it was a small minority of them all. So back to that 3/5, it says, see, that's how they felt comfortable enslaving me, but that's not the truth. In fact, many of the founders who were Christians, half of the founding fathers, half of those who signed the Declaration of Independence had theological degrees. And everything that they're doing, they felt inspired, just like myself as a Christian, just like these two pastors, they're doing everything inspired by the Lord to do what is good. Well, many of those founders felt the same way, and they were conflicted. They hated the institution of slavery. In fact, one of the reasons why they had to write the Declaration of Independence was because they had actually abolished slavery prior to 1776 multiple times. But King George, England came down and said, nope, you guys are British colonies and you guys have to have slavery. You're British citizens. We have slavery in here in the great empire, and no. In the original draft of the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson was clear about the wrongs of slavery and how we have been trying to get off of this, but you won't let us. This is why we're trying to declare independence. And so the founders' view of feeling comfortable enslaving, no, many of them were not comfortable. They weren't at all. And there were some, and look, these people weren't perfect. So I'm just gonna say that right now, okay? These people weren't perfect. There were some who freed their slaves. Many of the founders freed their slaves when they died. Many of them freed them before the Revolutionary War. And some, like Jefferson, didn't. And Madison, they didn't. They still kind of held on for one reason or another. And look, these guys, this doesn't mean that they, were evil or lying. They just weren't perfect. I mean, let's be honest. None of us are perfect. Now, the reality is, okay, yeah, it looks a little bad, but they were very conflicted with this. And their motivation behind the Declaration and the Constitution was not so they can feel comfortable enslaving anyone of any color. In fact, they put it in Article 1, Section 2, that they were going to abolish the slave trade in 20 years. They were giving the Southerners, they were putting them on notice. Hey, you got 20 years to get off of slavery, not depend on slavery for anything, because we're going to cut it. And they were going to try to abolish in 20 years. Obviously, it didn't. That's why we needed the Civil War. But listen, America was the first Western nation to abolish slavery, period. They were the first ones, and one of the first ones to abolish slavery later on, 50 years later. They were one of the first. Only 4 to 6% of all slaves that came from Africa that were either hijacked, stolen, or sold by other people in Africa, which they were sold, only 4 to 6% actually made it to America. Over 90% of the slaves made it everywhere else. And in America, there was slavery did not exist for 400 years. It was more like 250. And so if we're gonna treat America a kind of way regarding slavery that only had 4 to 6%, how come we're not treating every other Caribbean and every other Hispanic and Latin American nation by the same standard?
You know what the funniest holiday is for me? It's the 4th of July.
I'll bet.
Because when we have the 4th of July and the flags are waving and we're singing the Star Spangled Banner, it's not that I don't love this country. It's the only country I ever known. I absolutely love this country. It's just that I was not free in 1776. July the 4th does not mean to me what it means to you. When you say you want to go back to the founding fathers, I don't want to go with you.
Me neither.
Because if we go back to the founding fathers, I wouldn't even be in the house. I would be in the field picking cotton. That's the bitter truth. You can tell the truth. You can just tell the truth in school, in class. You can tell the truth. We had liberation and we have an Independence Day, but it wasn't the 4th of July. And we celebrate with you. We eat hot dogs and we make apple pie and all of that. But the truth of the matter, independence was only for one group of people on the 4th of July. It was not for Native Americans. It was not for African Americans.
This part was interesting, right? He says the 4th of July is not for me. I was not free on the 4th of July. The Independence Day that I believe he's talking about is Juneteenth, which is June 19th, which was a few years after the Civil War, that the final slaves found out that they were free, that the North had freed them from the South. But that notion that no one was free, freedom was only for white people in 1776. That was wrong, because not just on the 4th of July, all right, not just then, but during that time, I mean, in Connecticut, there were times where Black people actually were free the whole time, that they were voters, they were citizens. And there were so many Hispanics, okay, Native Americans, and Blacks who were free, not just pre-1776, but post-Revolutionary War, who earned and won their freedom and went on to live amazing lives, contributed and did great things. Those lives matter. People like John Morant and Wentworth Cheswell, William Nell, Absalom Jones, Peter Salem, Prince Estabrook, Lemuel Haynes, Richard Allen, Benjamin Banneker, Harriet Hoosier, James Armistead, and so many more. So many more. In fact, Burke Davis was a Black historian during the 1800s who wrote a book, and this was put out in the mid-1800s, and it was about Black founding fathers, the heroes of the Revolutionary War. And it says so many of their names, and these were names that were taught. These were names that were spread out. I mean, this isn't just Black history, which it is. It ought to be American history, because these people were heroes. They were heroes. Now, the sentiment that the pastor is feeling about, hey, the 4th is not for me, that comes from really Frederick Douglass's famous speech, where actually he spoke, and it was entitled, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July?" And in that, he ripped the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, saying, why am I celebrating the 4th of July? Because look at us, we're still slaves. Look at us. And this was about in the, leading up to the Civil War. And all of his sentiment, obviously he was justified. He was, right to be upset because, hey, this is barely 100 years old. It's supposed to be freedom and liberty and justice for all, but not all are free. Not all are free. Now, a lot were free, but not all of them. Well, here's the thing. Frederick Douglass did say those words, but a few years later, as he was meeting and making friends with other people, and he reread and was looking at the Constitution, looking at the Declaration of Independence, looking at the conversations that were had, because those were all documented, Frederick Douglass changed his mind.
Well, well, well. How the turntables.
And then he turned around and said that the Constitution is the most anti-slavery document there ever was, and he hyped it. And he was like, wow, this is an amazing thing. Now, yes, it didn't fix it all, but that wasn't the point. He started to realize the same thing that you and I should realize. Listen, the founders did the best that they could. They could not finish the job. The problem was too big for one generation. So the next generation was supposed to do their part. And then the next generation, that's why in the Constitution, they put amendments that add the amendment process, that as we figure things out, as we see things that they did not see coming, we can make the necessary changes. Because that was the whole point. The Declaration of Independence was America's mission statement. And it was designed to say, look, this is who we are called to be. This is the standard, and we need to strive towards this. So it wasn't perfect, obviously, but no one is perfect and nothing is perfect. We were all supposed to play our part. But the thing where, even with Frederick Douglass, we have to be careful, because so many times we pick and choose and we take quotes from people who are no longer alive out of context. And when you take history out of context, then that alters so much. In fact, when you distort history, you can direct the present. Catch me? When you distort history, you can direct the present. If you can control history, you can control the present. You can control today. And this is important, because then if not, we lose all of those names that I mentioned, those Black women and men. There were women in there too. We lose their stories. Listen, and we need to say their names, okay? Because their Black lives matter. But we can learn from Frederick Douglass and his evolution and his process, because the more he began to listen, the more he began to learn. And that's important for all of us. We need to listen to one another. Listen to people that disagree with you. We do. We need to learn to listen. We need to learn to respect people. Listen, you don't have to disrespect someone that disagrees with you, all right? Because when we learn to listen, we all learn. So I want to quickly read Galatians chapter 6, verse 9 and 10, because I believe it's a great takeaway for all of us regarding this topic and regarding this conversation. The Apostle Paul says this: "Let us not get tired of doing good, for we will reap at the proper time if we don't give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us work for the good of all, especially for those who belong to the household of faith." telling you, that verse inspired a lot of the founders, and they said, look, all we can do is the best that we can. And that has inspired Christians, and not just Christians, but a lot of people, generation after generation. Let us not grow weary of doing good. The reason why is because there's a lot of bad people who don't get tired doing bad. And so we need to make sure that we do not grow tired doing good, and it's good for all. The problems that we have, we've inherited from previous generations, okay? The problem that you have personally, you probably inherited from your parents, okay? We just can't cancel parents out like that. We can't cancel people out like that. We are called to do the best with what we have been given. Do good for all with what we have been given. Okay, because listen, the problems of the past, the reason why they're still today is because they're too big. Some people made mistakes, some people didn't. Some people tried the best that they could. And the reality is that, notice here, when he says, hey, I'm talking about reaping and sowing, as a pastor, as a non-white pastor, both me and TD Jakes are reaping the fruits of what the founders have sown. Because the things that they did, though it wasn't perfect for everybody in that generation, we can see, wow, that, man, a lot has changed. It is not the same thing as 1776. Those who say, I want to go back to the founding fathers, I don't want to go with you because that means I'm a slave.
History began on July 4th, 1776. Everything before that was a mistake.
I mean, look, some people might mean that, but look, I know a lot of people. When they say that, when I say that, because I believe that, when I say that, I'm not saying we go backwards as a nation. No, it's that we look back. We look back to what the goals were. We look back to who we are supposed to be, and let us strive to be that today. Those who say we're going to go back to the founding fathers is back to principles, not of slavery or racism and all, because that was, again, hey, look at today. That's not perfect. It is looking back at certain principles, and the principles that I've been talking about, principles that will lead us forward to do good for all. That's what that means, for at least for some of us. I can't say that for everybody because some people, it might be different, but that's what that means. And we should not grow tired of doing good, because there's another generation. There's another generation who's going to enjoy the fruit. They're going to reap the fruits that we sown, just like we are reaping the fruits of what people in the past have sown. We need to play our part. Hey, and I don't know if you know, but hey, this is easy, common sense. There's a time gap between what you plant and what you reap. Some things take a long time. That's why we can't grow tired of doing good. We cannot. It's gonna take time. But hey, we're supposed to do our part until Jesus comes back. We're never going to fix all the problems. We're never gonna end all racism. We're never gonna, be a country that never commits an injustice. No, that's impossible, because sin is sin. But what we can do is do our part, and never grow tired, because people who do bad, we're always gonna have them. So we need to make sure that we are doing our part in our history right now. We can make history by doing our part today, and to continue the amazing legacy of people in the past, and hey, alter the negative legacies of also those in the past.
But we celebrate with you. Then come celebrate with me. Come into my house like you did and eat my food and see my kids and see that I am human. And see that I love my kids like you love your kids, and I want the best for them, even if they fall short of it and they messed up.
So in the end, does TD Jakes have to celebrate the 4th of July? No, he doesn't, okay? No one does. Personally, I feel bad for you, but at the same time, no one should treat you bad for having that opinion. I don't want you to be treated that way, in the same way I wouldn't want to be treated any kind of way. But I do love what the pastor just said. Look, why don't we just celebrate each other? But I'm gonna add something. We celebrate each other by serving each other. When he said, man, let my kids see that you care, that's true. We should let the next generation see how much we care. And we should not grow tired of doing good, loving others as Jesus loved us. Because listen, as a Christian, if you're a Jesus follower, I want you to understand, we must reflect the love of Christ to all, and have a special love, even more, for those that are Jesus followers, a part of the family of God. But hey, Paul said it's everybody, because it is through that love, it is through the love of God, it is through the love of God that human hearts can change. And when human hearts change, when enough human hearts change, the world changes.